Hi, I'm Lianna, and welcome back to the Wirex Podcast. Today, we're asking who gets to tell the story in Web3 and who's finally getting heard. Joining us is Jordan Bayne, award-winning filmmaker, founder of Film3 and The Squad, and head of GenAI and Web3 at Goldfinch. We're diving into creative power shifts, blockchain-backed storytelling, and why it's time to burn the old script. Welcome, Jordan.
Hi, I'm super psyched to be here.
I'm so excited for you to be here too.
I know we can't contain ourselves. Even pre-recording, we were like, "Wee!"
I know. So, let's start with your professional background and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, sure. So I started as an actor, and I still consider myself an actor because everything I do sort of comes from that place of truth. But while I was acting, I realized at the time there were not that many complicated and interesting roles being written for women, so I decided to do that. And from there, I then became a writer. And then through that process, I was like, well, I actually don't want anyone else to tell the story because I have a very strong vision for it. And so I became a director. And that experience I thought would open up more opportunities. But in fact, what it did was really teach me a great deal about the film business, the entertainment business, and the lack of opportunities, especially for women. And then we can break it down to queer women, to women of color, to, every cultural identity and gets broken down smaller and smaller and smaller, right? Especially for women. And suddenly, you're seeing reports of 95% of the directors in Hollywood was the report, but I do think it's a global thing, are white men. And so 5% are women. And it's like, how do you have a sustainable living like that? So these are some of the things the pain points I would say that I was beginning to feel. And especially when I took a short film, The Sea Is All I Know, all the way to the Academy Awards. It was an Oscar contender, and and everyone said it was going to be my calling card, and I was going to have a career. And again, as a career, you want a sustainable career. I'm not somebody who was looking for Wind Moon and Maseratis and Fiori, and things. I just wanted to be able to make my next movie and tell stories that were meaningful. But I was being gatekept. Myself and a lot of people is what I discovered. And it didn't matter that I took it all the way to the Oscars. I was watching cisgendered white men specifically getting opportunities when they weren't taking their projects as far. And so the sort of the long and the short of it is that I discovered crypto in 2015, and I loved self-sovereignty. The idea of self-sovereignty, of being your own bank, started to really mesh for me as far as like media. And at that time, I had Charlie Lee under contract to do a documentary on Litecoin. He didn't quite see the vision of its importance of like getting the conversation around Litecoin into people's living rooms, through a documentary. And so it wasn't again until late 2020, in fact, that my brother started saying, "Hey, what do you think about these NFTs?" I was like, "What do you mean NFTs? You mean crypto art? Do you mean that crypto kitty things from 2017, and that I thought was just a joke?" He's like, "Yeah, those things." Well, come to find out, that wasn't much of a joke if you owned a punk. And so I jumped in, and as you remember, it started on Clubhouse. Again, like elevating women in the NFT space was the first thing, because I saw women not being able to get to speak on the stages. And then it was just so very clear to me that this was going to be revolutionary for filmmakers. And so I started what was then the NFT Film Squad, that has always been the squad, the Film3 squad, and then we started meeting every week, and that turned into 4 times a week. And that turned into me branding the movement and branding what ultimately became a business model and a production production suite, basically, Film3 in March 2022. So it's 2025 now, and we're pushing it towards the next
Wow.
chapter. Yeah. So I
Wow.
think that encompasses, kind of like early and then hyper speed up to Film3, which has
Yeah.
really been my life's work.
Yeah, I mean, I still remember those times, in Clubhouse, with you and the squad, right? Yeah, and what you've done with film in Web3 is just amazing. Um, but
Thank
I
you.
really want to also ask that, what does it actually mean to burn the script, right, in the context of Web3?
Sure. Well, I think that where we are now, which is really fascinating, when we went through this bear market and the diamond handers are here and the paper handed are gone, right?
Hmm.
I was recently looking at I don't know what you call those maps, I don't know, it's like it's circular. It was the squad, and then everyone that we had like been amplifying, because that's a big part of what we did, was amplify and market other people and their projects as they were coming into the ecosystem. Now, to get to your question, like what that was doing, what we were doing then was burning what is still is a broken industry. So the script of how do you make a film? How can you make a film? What is the process? I think the process in traditional Hollywood has often been you have a screenplay, you go to someone and you ask them to fund your screenplay. So, right, crowdfunding platforms and all that popped up when you couldn't get private equity or you couldn't get studio backing or anything like that. Then it's a bit like, who do you know? And if you don't know anyone, then your gate kept out in that way. And what I was saying before, your gate kept
Hmm.
out systemically in many other ways. So if you want to tell a story, more than likely, it's incredibly difficult to even get your screenplay financed, and so that you can actually tell your story. And then on top of that, you have to sell or assign your rights to them. They buy out your rights. Now, what we're saying in Film3 is
Hmm.
ownership of your IP is everything, right? It goes back to self-sovereignty.
Yeah.
Ownership of your IP is everything. So that's part of burning the script. It's like, no, I'm not going to give you the rights. I want to hold on to the ownership, because then I get the majority of the revenue of
Yeah.
what I'm making. But that's not the old way. The traditional way is, we'll pay you this little pittance, and then we're going to go off like Squid Games. It's not a pittance, $1 million, but when they make $100 million, it is, and the creator
Yeah.
only gets, yeah, I mean,
There's
Squid
a
Game is
huge
an
difference, right?
yes, so that the middleman, which is, the distributor, the marketer and distributor, which is Netflix, they made the big money pile. And that's basically the Hollywood model, is that they take your rights because you sell them. And the sad thing is that filmmakers still will get on their knees and beg for someone to take their rights. What we're saying is, burn that script, to use your words, burn that. We have a much better pathway. And the Film3 business model that I articulated, by looking at what Miguel was doing and helping and amplifying what Miguel was doing with Cayedita, and what, Julie Pacino has done with I Live Here Now, and what David Bianchi has done with Razor, what Stephen Murray has been building with Bingeable. Like, looking at all their pieces, I was able to pull together and articulate the entire business model and go, oh, from end to end, from financing to distribution, we can burn the old Hollywood script, the old way of doing things, and we can do it in a new way, which then gives us the creator ownership of their IP,
Hmm.
creator-led studios, right? That is
Yeah.
fueled by community, and community is Web3. I mean, that's the whole thing. And so they amplify you because they've got skin in the game, because they've maybe bought your digital asset that has given them a feeling, a sense that they are co-creating this brand or this project with you. And we see that a lot with Azuki and Pudgy Penguins
Hmm.
and Claynosaurus. We see that a lot with some of these PFP projects that have really sort of taken what I consider the Film3 business model, and at their level, because they
Yeah.
have these communities that are massive. And you can see like the pride in those communities. So again, if you can take that and all the way through distribution. Now, distribution, it comes in many, many different ways now, not just the traditional Hollywood way where you come to streaming platforms like Netflix or whatever. You see what's happening with YouTube. You see what's happening with TikTok. There are many different ways to distribute. I think that right now, one of the key unlocks that I've been working on
Mm-hmm.
for a long time, and part of my, the announcement that came with my partnership with Goldfinch is how now are we going to actually create a world where the creators can monetize off of the IP. And I can't speak too much about that, but I can speak to it in concept and theory because I've been talking about it for 4 years.
Yeah.
Does that answer the burning the script?
Yes, it does. It's we're really moving into a new paradigm, right? And
Yeah.
I think, you've done a really wonderful job in taking film and in the context of Web3, like, and really working out from inception to distribution, so really congratulations on that, right?
Thank
Because
you.
it's I mean, you've been in the trenches, right?
Yeah.
So we've all
Yeah.
been in the trenches.
Oof.
Um,
Yeah, we have.
but I think it's amazing that it's come this far. So who traditionally held the power to decide which stories get told, and how is Web3 challenging that? I mean, you kind of mentioned a little bit earlier, when you're talking about burning the script, how different is it? And also, and yeah, and I suppose, traditionally, do women get to have their stories told, for example? So
Mm.
yeah, I'd love for you to unpack that a little.
Oh, yeah, I'll unpack that. Um, yeah, so yeah, it is threaded straight off that last question is who, traditionally makes the decisions. Traditionally, men make the decisions because they are holding the power, right? They're holding some of the biggest positions in Hollywood and even globally. Again, I'm going to keep coming back to Hollywood because it's where most of the
Mm.
data comes out of, but it's not that different if you go to Cannes Film Festival, which I do. And you know, the you see a lot of incredibly intelligent, like ambitious, powerful women there.
Mm.
But mostly when we start to get up to the hierarchy of like who is the CEO, who is, of these production companies, of these studios, it's almost always men. And in fact, it's almost always men that's the CEO, the COO, the CFO, right? So men are making the decisions. And, I'm very, very fortunate with Goldfinch that their CEO is a woman, right? And their COO is incredibly attuned to the disparities of opportunities in the business as a man.
Right.
And, like they have a female, I think Female Voices is called, like, short film fund that they
Mhm.
do as well. So, but to try to keep this answer mm,
Yeah, so I mean,
short
I
and
suppose
complete.
I know, because there's just so much to unpack, right? With who holds the power to decide which stories get told, and there's
Mm.
and it's so multi-layered as well because then there's the disparity with, like, the women, the
Yeah,
inequality, right?
yeah,
But then also indigenous voices don't get heard as
yeah.
well, right? But then also in trying to frame this a little bit better, you know, so for example, if there's a really good story, a really heartfelt story, versus a story that and a story that's very Web3, right?
Mm-hmm.
Versus something that they know is going to be a sure box office box office hit, you know. I mean, I suppose that's the traditional way they decide.
Well, money is always
Yeah.
money. The bottom line is always the way they decide. And, again, they have to own the rights so that when they have the distribution, which is where they make the money, the merchandise is
Yeah.
where they make the money, right? even though it has been proven that women-led films with women in the lead make actually more money. And I don't have the data set with me right now, but that's been one of the most fascinating things, because then you realize maybe it's not about money. Maybe it's still about holding the power seat,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think we see that just sadly globally in sort of geopolitics.
Yeah.
Uh, but the the voices that are the 5% that are, as I said, it's 95% of the directors directing films right now are white men still. And Alma Harald called this out at Sundance, like, I don't know, 5, 6 years ago.
Mm.
Um, and, Ava DuVernay has been calling it out as well. And she's one of the rare, both of them, they're rare exceptions of women that are getting greenlit, but it's very hard to get greenlit. Even Sofia Coppola can't get greenlit. I mean, it's very, very difficult, which is why we're trying to build an alternative path so that you
Yeah.
don't have to go to these gatekeepers, because the gatekeepers are looking at your film and thinking, well, that film is not universal, or that's not going to make
Mm.
us a lot of money. But quite frankly, and I use this, and you may have heard me use this example, but I think
Mm-hmm.
this is an incredible example of what you can do and what Web3 can be. Tyler Perry was
Mm.
quoted in an article saying that he did not go for, he wanted to own the IP. And so he didn't want to go to a studio or someplace where he was going to have to sell
Mm-hmm.
the IP to get financed. He said, I went to the Black community for Black money. And he goes, and they showed up. And they showed up
Um,
because they wanted to see themselves. And and I wrote about this in a Decrypt article about how representation matters. They wanted to see their story told from their lived experience, from their culture. And this was the way
yeah.
to do it,
Yeah.
right? So it's not told through the lens of a white man or a white or a studio, with a board of white dudes. And again, I have lots of friends that are white dudes who are super wonderful people. So I'm not trying to throw shade on an entire like section of the
Yeah.
world, but I am trying to shine some light on the systemic issue.
Yeah.
And Tyler Perry really, he said it. And his movies, think about
Mm-hmm.
it. They financed it, and they were the built-in audience, and they were proud of it. This is Web3. This is the Film3
Yeah.
business model. The financing by the community, the amplification and the pride of being part of it, so the skin in the game that they have, and then the built-in audience, the distribution part where they show up and they pay money again to see the film because they're so proud of seeing their voice
Yeah.
from their lived experience. And that is really important. It's the same thing I say about like the difference between I can't remember Shireen's last name, but she's the Palestinian filmmaker whose film right now is
Mm-hmm.
she was filming right before everything started on October 7th, and they had to flee from Palestine. She finished the film. It did incredible this year at Sundance. It's doing incredible on the festival. But no one could tell the story about Palestine and about a Palestinian story about a family like she can,
Mm. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It's her.
Yeah.
And she's reflecting her culture in a lived experience. So I'm not sure that I didn't like digress a little bit, but
No, it's perfect because it kind of leads me to the next question that I want to ask you is,
Mm.
have you had a moment where you felt empowered to tell a story you couldn't have in Web 2 or traditional media?
Oh yeah, I have. Empowered. So that's really interesting. So when I dropped Red Flags in January 2022, I was empowered by a community, by
Mm.
Lore Punk, if you know Lore Punk.
Mm-hmm.
She was the executive producer. She had received some Twitter money. She bought her punk, and she sold something. I can't remember. So she had some extra cash and she wanted to pay it forward. And she saw me, and she executive produced Red Flags. So I couldn't have made that. And I've got two stories, and I couldn't have made that and dropped. We made that in August, September 2001 is when the production was. And we dropped it in January 2022, and Claire Silver bought it. And it was an incredible moment historically for minting a short film on the blockchain because it was community powered. From Lorepunk providing the funds, and then I was able to go shoot it, and then Claire buying it. And there was a lot of excitement and goodwill around that. I wouldn't have been able to make that film because, again, my stories typically shine a light on subject matter that doesn't get funded, and was about intimate partner violence. And then the next piece that I did, in fact, that I dropped in January 2025, was empowered by GenAI, and it was my family story of the Trail of Tears, and the colonization of the eastern band of Cherokees, and how many people had to move, but my family went and hid in the hills. So they stayed in the Smoky Mountains, and my family members. And that's a story, again, a trail of tears about an indigenous group of people that I knew. I mean, it's been sitting in my hard drive for over a decade. No one was going to fund that film because they're not interested in those stories, right? You're not going to, they're dramatic. They're about colonization in the US, so, but Gen AI, I was like, I need to sort of get my handle on these tools. And so I was able to make that film with the tools at the level they were then in January. And that it's just been insane how they've changed in 6 months. But I was able to really tell that story in a way that was heartfelt, under 5 minutes, never would have been funded in traditional Hollywood. I was able to make that sitting in my desk, talking just like I am here with you now, over the course of a few days. I was able to do a helicopter shot in that. Like, I was able to burn a village down and do a helicopter shot. And, that's like over $100,000 shot that, again, I was empowered to do because of the generative AI tools. And so, yeah, I think that there's a lot of democratization that can happen for us in Web3, and especially as far as like the Film3 business model. Really, the missing link was production. How can we bring those costs down? How can we tell those stories? And Gen AI has really given us those tools.
That's amazing. And I wanted to kind of like point out that what you were saying earlier on is that I can't remember who you mentioned sold a punk to finance the film, right? And I'm like, how amazing is that, right? Like,
It's incredible.
Let me just sell an asset, like sell a punk, and we'll finance the film. And what you spoke of was also on community, right? Like, I think the community really got together, and I think that's the beauty of Web3, is the community. And I know we say this all the time, but that actually it really does make a difference, and it really does help shift that paradigm with community, right? I don't think we'd be able to do that without community.
No way. It's the fuel. It's everything.
And
I often say community is the I was just gonna say, I've said often community is the utility. You know how we're so utility forward on, and our community is the utility. And if you understand that, then you understand that community is the most important thing in Web3, and certainly really in Web2. I mean, again, one of my go-to conversations is always Taylor Swift. Look what she's done. Look what she has done. She has made people fanatics. And why are they true fans? There's two reasons that I go back to all the time. She makes them feel that they belong to something. So the sense of belonging to a community, not just to Taylor, to a community. And they feel seen. They feel that she sees them. These are, I think, two of the most important things that you can offer a human being.
Yeah, and I think that's just so beautiful, right? And I wanted to maybe, take us back a little bit. Have you, what was the first project or collaboration that made you feel like you were part of a storytelling revolution?
You mean here in Web3 or in general in my life?
In general in your life, the first project or collaboration that really made you feel like you were part of something. Part of like, the storytelling revolution.
Of a revolution, yeah, that's the difference. I think probably when I made Argo, and the reason is because that's right when the digital cameras came out.
Hmm.
It wasn't, well, it was community. I was sitting in my favorite little, I called it my office, which was a wine bar in the East Village in New York, and with some other filmmakers and artists and actors. We were doing our thing, sipping some wine, having an aperitivo and talking about these new tools that suddenly we had our hands on cameras. Again, the gatekeeping had kind of been stripped
Mm.
away, right? Because we didn't have to try to get those film cameras. And suddenly we had the ability with these cameras, and at this point we couldn't even swap lenses on them, but we could tell stories. And so we could figure out a story to tell with these cameras, to make it feel like cinema. And so that's really, I think, the first time I felt like, wow, there's a revolution going on here. I often, I made Argo. I produced it in Joshua Tree because I knew we would get some great production value there since we
Hmm.
couldn't, swap lenses. I just knew a point and shoot would create great production value because it's so beautiful there. And we made that. But in general, the whole spirit of the independent film world at that time.
Mm.
Sundance had already been established, and you had already seen like Spike Mike, wait, is it Spike Mike Slackers and Dykes? So that's the book that came out that talked about, the LGBTQIA films that like Go Fish that had come out at
Hmm.
Sundance.
Hmm.
And Spike Lee, Do the Right Thing had come out, and the Slacker stuff from Kevin Smith had come out. That was a really important moment. And then when we got cameras, we could put in our hands that we could join that
Yeah.
sort of independent revolution. That was massive. And yeah, and Argo
And
did
you're like,
really well.
wow, now with AI, right? So
Yeah,
that's another
same thing.
storytelling revolution, and I think it's just wonderful that um because it gives people a voice, you know,
Yes.
the
Yes.
opportunity to have their stories told, right?
Yes.
Uh, and it can be their family story or story of their culture. With so many people being displaced at the moment, I think it's a very important tool for humanity, to reconnect back with their roots, right?
Yes.
Yes. So tell me about the resistance from traditional spaces when you've been experimenting with Web3 formats.
Well, I mean, you can't.
Was that a bit of a nervous laugh? Like, what shall I tell?
No, well, I mean, I think it's more than anything. I think it's more an irony. It's just the irony of what could. Oh God, where do I start? I'm going to start with blockchain,
Mhm.
and then I'm going to go to AI.
Yeah.
The resistance from traditional Hollywood we should expect. The fact that Hollywood is broken and has opaque accounting systems, magical accounting systems, is by design. It's
Mm.
so that they don't have to pay out the creators, they don't have to pay out the actors, the talent, from those back end points that they negotiated. So they have this super magical accounting that
Oh,
that is impossible to. It's like a bowl of spaghetti, right?
right.
Impossible to unwind. So of course they're going to not like the transparency of blockchain,
Yeah.
which, quite frankly, I think every creator should be clamoring towards. If
Mm.
filmmakers understood how powerful blockchain is, just that element by itself for distribution, I think that they would be jumping at some of these, Web3 distribution platforms, but they don't. And that is, been a very challenging thing to educate people. The other thing that I would say is the resistance to Gen AI. There's a ton of fear mongering around that, especially from like, you know, the people that have blocked me, like Justine Bateman, for instance, who won't have a civil conversation about it. And she's blocked all of us. She's blocked me and Jason Charnick and Lauren Neal and Julian Flores and I think Chris Hackett. Like we've all been blocked by this woman because she won't have a civil discourse about how much more power Gen AI gives the creators, and it makes her relevant, I think, to fearmonger. So, but the truth is it's here,
Yeah.
and we need to embrace it. We also need to embrace it because then we have a voice in the ethical use of it. If you don't embrace it, and again, the funny thing is that the haters, at least at me
Yeah.
online, are again almost always white men, and I want to say to them, but you've been given carte blanche, so
Yeah.
don't tell me that I can't tell my story with the tools that I have that are accessible at my disposal. And I feel that for anyone who is trying to tell a story, I think that Gen AI democratizes things in an incredible way. And I'm not saying that it's not expensive to run to subscribe to these platforms. It is.
Yeah.
But it's not as expensive as trying to get financing from someone who's gonna maybe try to take your reps.
Production, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for a full on IRL production. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, with AI, especially with the traditional, spaces, right? There's enough pie for everyone,
There
you know?
is.
And it's that mindset, right? Where it's like, no, you're not going to have a piece of the pie because, then that's not enough for me, right? But
Yeah.
actually, there is enough for everyone, and I think Web3 and AI are, it's really poised to change all of that, right? And I love AI because it just gives everyone the opportunity to tell their story. And,
Yes.
what are we without our stories, right? Um, you know, yeah, I wanted to also ask, like, could a decentralized storytelling ecosystem ever replace institutions like Netflix or, even Spotify? Or are they just too big or
Uh,
yeah,
this is the future. This is the future. I believe wholeheartedly that we are so early. I know we've been saying that for 4.5 years, but we are true.
yeah,
We are is true, but we are so early. And in fact, I have a Substack article coming out today on the IP economy because I've been talking about it as I have in this, creator-led IP studios, creator-led studios, ownership of your own IP since the very beginning, since 4.5 years ago. And the reason I have written this article is because suddenly you're starting to see the ability to actually use decentralization to tell massive amounts of stories. Massive. And AI is, of course, the force multiplier of this, as well as the blockchain. So being able to, first of all, have provenance on the blockchain, and you see the companies that are doing it, Story, Core, Camp. These are infrastructures that are building building platforms so that IP can come in and expand. So this is the sort of like the gist of my conversation in my article today. Expansion. Now think about what Gen Z has taught us over the last couple of years, that they're not interested in the Netflix subscription model. They tap in and they tap out and they tap in and they tap out, right? Because they don't want to be paying for something that they're not watching. What they do is they go to TikTok and they do remixes and they do whatever they're called, and they're going to YouTube, and they are basically saying to us, I want to participate, I want to co-create. And this is the ethos of what I've been saying about Film 3 and what Web3 is, which is, can we co-create? And so what these platforms are building are homes for IP to co-create with their communities. And that's what I've been building in stealth for the last longer. My stealth project that I continue to call my stealth project, which will be revealed in the next few months, is basically something that I've been working on for 20 years. But in June 2021, I knew Web3 was going to be the home for it. And it's taken this long, and it's also needed people like Core and Camp and Story to come in and build what they're building in order for us to co-create with our communities. And then imagine that. There's so much more interest in brand to participant, right? Co-creating with each other, with the community, that why would they want to go to subscription models? I really believe that the Gen AI as the force multiplier, whether it's film or comics or whatever, that people are going to be co-creating IP more so than sitting in a movie theater and watching it. And I think we have to be cognizant of that as creators and filmmakers.
Yeah, and also like, with Gen AI, I think, you'll have more content, right? And you can also personalize content, and that's the beauty of Web3 as well as AI. So what excites you most about storytelling, where storytelling is headed in this new era?
Well, I think we have the capacity to touch more lives and to see more authentic stories. I mean, I much rather, I use the same examples a lot. I didn't like Green Book. You know why I didn't like Green Book? Because it was a black man's story told by a white man.
Mm.
I want to hear stories that come from an authentic lived experience. And that's one of the reasons, like even traveling to different cultures, when you get to experience someone's culture and see, like, when I go to Morocco and the fish come in at 9 p.m. because the sun went down and it's not hot anymore, and the women come and they make dinner that night because the heat is down. The sun, the heat is so impossible to like do during the day. You begin to understand how a culture is built around the elements, and how fascinating is that?
Yeah,
When you have grown up in a culture where the food is on the table for dinner at 6 p.m., and why? And I
yeah,
think that we keep learning, and I say this a lot, but I think it's the most important thing. Stories are the most powerful thing in the world.
yeah,
And if we can understand each other's stories, if we can culturally see
yeah,
authentic lived experiences from different people, then there's no us or them anymore. We're all just one
absolutely.
people,
Yeah,
who have by circumstances drawn up different really cool cultural things we can
yeah,
experience through
yeah.
story, and we can
And
reach through stories. And I think I think, just to wrap this up, the
yeah.
Web3 and Gen AI are giving us that opportunity to see more of those stories.
Yeah, and it's stories of the human condition, you
Yes,
know?
that's my thing. That is my thing.
So is the script really being burned or just being rewritten by a different group of people?
Well, that could be a bomb of a statement right there, because people are often saying that people rewrite narratives, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think I think the script is being burned, and I think the other the other stories that have been latent are being pulled out to the forefront. I think that there are lots of stories, but I think that the script that we've all been pointed to, that we all were told that this is the way it is, I think that script is being burned. And then I think that makes room for all the other stories.
That was Jordan Bayne, and a clear reminder that the future of storytelling belongs to creators, not gatekeepers. I'm Lianna, and this has been the Wirex Podcast. Subscribe, share, and stay curious. The next chapter of Web3 is already being written.